The OSP holiday sale is on. Browse our entire selection of enamel pins and enjoy stacking discounts of up to 25% off during the weekend of Black Friday. All that and plenty more merch is available at overlysarcastic.shop, link below. Greetings, brothers, and welcome to a new detailed Diatribe. I am Blue, and I'm joined by Red.
Hello, it's me. I'm also here.
Matching energy.
Look, when they give the Space Marine treatment to my boys, then we'll talk. But for now...
You can only muster so much enthusiasm for the boringest bitches in the Warhammer universe compared to your beloved Eldar.
Much like the army I play, I am distant and separate from all the bullshit that's going down. I did my time a long time ago, and now I've mellowed out significantly.
Me, enlightened Eldar player, I simply choose not to see chaos.
Tee-hee-hee.
We are here to talk about a little game that I've been playing lately, Warhammer Space Marine 2, and the, quite frankly, astounding lesson in writing that it provides us if we are willing to listen, because we are talking about how Warhammer Space Marine 2, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2, the longest goddamn title in existence, is no lore, only vibes.
I'm gonna be interested to see this because just the basic thesis of this Warhammer 40k product really is good about not having lore is probably the hottest take I've ever heard.
We'll see if I can justify myself here. I always like to come into the detailed diatribes with something to prove.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Usually coming from like Spider-Man 2, only fine. Spider-Man 3 is really the great one. Star Wars Episode 3 is actually a masterpiece. You just need to read the book. Like I've got to bring the spice to the detailed diatribes. I have to get that somehow.
So what this tells me is that when Space Marine 3 comes out, we're gonna get the detailed diatribe. Space Marine 2, only mid. Space Marine 3, actually the best of the bunch.
I don't know, this is a tough act to follow, but as we can see, the title is long. The backstory for Warhammer anything is infinitely longer. So our task today is to understand how in the goddamn Space Marine 2 handles the world building of the most notoriously convoluted intellectual property possibly in all of modern media, at least by reputation, if not in point of fact.
Oh yeah, and we gotta loop in the context that you went into this 100% blind.
We'll get there in a second.
Oh, my bad.
That's 2 slides. He's just barely ahead of me there, Red.
My bad. Okay. I'll trust the process.
So our task, figure out what's going on with the world building. Our data set, specifically focusing on the opening hour of the game plus a little bit of tidbits. And our purpose, this is one of the most eye-opening experience as an audience member learning about writing that I've had in a very long time. And I never wanted to learn this because Space Marine 2 nails something in a drum that I've been banging on, something I've been yapping about for so goddamn long.
Oh, boy.
So we'll see if we can't learn anything. Ooh. But Red, you're exactly right. How the hell did I get here? Well, I've never played Warhammer. Not the RPG, the tabletop mini battler, any of the other random whatever the bullshit kinds of games there are, Total War, Vermintide, etc. None of it. I have no context, no experience. My only investment in this franchise up to this point is that Henry Cavill gets to have fun making his show. He is apparently a Custodes player. Until about 2 weeks ago, I had no idea what that meant.
I was trying to figure out if that was a Wraithwalker, but that makes more sense.
No goddamn idea. But here's how I got invested in this. I was watching a review of Space Marine 2 by YouTuber SkillUp, who I very much enjoy, love his work. And the game seems neat-ish. He was talking about how he enjoyed it. It feels like a very old-school kind of game. The gunplay's really good. The combat feels very satisfying, whether you're shooting aliens or slashing them with your chainsword. And he was talking about how the multiplayer is really well-constructed and yada yada yada. It's okay, fine. Until I saw the shields for the Bulwark class in multiplayer. And I said, oh?
Yeah.
Oh?
Yeah, here we go.
What? And from that moment, I'm like, okay, maybe for the shields I need to actually do this. So the thing that hooked me was the vibe. I was sold on the aesthetic. It's like, oh, I see what this, I get to play Barbie dress up, but for him, finally, finally, this is it.
Gold-plated Art Deco Gothic, hell yeah, gimme.
Our tasteful gold-plated Art Deco Gothic minimalism. So this was my entry point for this. I say this to explain the context that I do not have for this world. From the point of view of a player like me, getting into Warhammer is really complicated because there's apparently a lot to work through.
Oh, you know.
So the opening hour of Space Marine 2, in my opinion, was the make or break window, in their case make, for the player to get invested in the game world and be willing to continue on and learn about whatever the hell else is relevant for the story of the world and the plot. And in the first hour, they accomplished that with an opening little screen of text, a multi-scene cinematic, just a couple minutes long, the prologue tutorial level, one more little cutscene when you're back on the ship, and then some downtime on the in-ship hub area. And that's all they need to get the player invested. So what on earth did they manage to accomplish in that time. On paper, just getting through the bare essentials of the plot, relevant factions, keyword relevant, Imperium of Man and the Tyranids, stakes of the macro level conflict being the eternal war between them and a whole bunch of other people, we'll get there later, the stakes of the game level conflict, which is evacuating some worlds from a Tyranid invasion and untangling the mysterious Project Aurora. No relation to the Reds webcomic. We got our side characters, Gadriel, Chadriel, Charon, Captain Acheran, and the Chaplain, who sucks, and our main character, Titus, who also sucks, but that plays out over the course of the game. That's not for us to worry about.
The OSP
right now.
community has forgiven Titus for his character development's rocky start.
Yes, but as we see, this is a lot of what, a little bit of who, so far no why. That's a good thing. That's a very good thing in the grand scheme of this construction, because critically this is all present, relevant information. If we get into the why, we start to get into the dreaded backstory. We go into the minds of the game manuals and the books and the extended lore novels.
Oh,
but that's not what any of this is. This is all very, very present stuff that we're seeing in this first little hour of gameplay that can point to the wider world and kind of fill it in and give it a little bit of texture, but we're not drowning in lore and details just yet, and frankly we never do in the course of this game. So before we get any further, allow me to be perfectly clear about one thing, really a couple things. I do not care about the lore. I do not want to learn about it. Please do not explain it to me.
Oh, well, my apologies. I hope it wasn't too tortuous to play the game with me on the couch.
No, it was fine, but like what we got out of that conversation is all I care to learn, and anything else that I hear is like, oh, okay, cool, neat, but I don't need it. It's like, okay, usually when you're trying to tell someone what's going on in Warhammer, it's a lot of, in the year 30,000, the God Emperor of Mankind got whacked off his ass on cold meds and died, but he's actually in the warp and looking sexy fighting Tzeentch, and a bunch of the Primarchs decided to do heresy. Stop. Back up. I don't care. It's way too far in the weeds. I have no idea how this connects to anything. I cannot get invested in any of that as a new player.
Yeah.
It's interesting, sure, once you are already invested in the world, but from the perspective of the brand new player, none of that lands. It goes right over, it slides off my smooth skull and bounces around the cavernous expanse of my empty cranium.
Yeah, I do think that Warhammer 40k has always benefited tremendously from the fact that you don't need to know the lore to be having fun with the gameplay. Admittedly, the tabletop side of things has gotten increasingly inaccessible for various reasons, price point being the main one, as well as rule changes.
$210 for Carnifex Assault package.
Yeah. In order to build up to the level of having a play-ready army, you need to drop a lot of money on it, and when the game updates, your extremely expensive, cool unit might have gotten nerfed to the point of complete unusability, and your entire meta might not function anymore. It's pretty devastating. The reason why most people who I know got into Warhammer stayed there was not so much for the play aspect, but because they liked the minis. They liked the process of painting minis. They liked building out a fun army, being able to subdivide, like, oh, we'll do a little 1,500 point battle just for fun, I'll see how well this works. It's got the appeal of the strategy game stuff, but you may note that's completely ancillary to the lore, and in fact, the lore is frequently at odds with the actual mechanics of the gameplay. As an Eldar player, the entire lore around the Eldar is that they are a dying race that is extremely careful to not suffer unnecessary casualties if possible, because every soul lost to the warp is gone forever, and like half of them get recycled. And then you deploy an army of like 30 guys and they all get wiped out by Tyranids because you rolled bad, and it's like, well, I guess my craft world is sorry, everybody. And then you got the people who are doing like the novels, which I've heard are, well, at least somewhat quite good.
Some of them are very good, apparently. Yeah.
So like you've got like 3 or 4 different elements of this that are drawing people in. You've got the people who are in it for the lore, you've got the people who are in it for the strategy game, you've got the people who are in it for the minis painting, and then this video game is like, hey, we're cutting off large swaths of that. The minis painting thing, the army building, none of that matters. You are playing one dude with 2 other guys. That's it. You never get to choose, like, even your loadout choices are minimal. And you go from there and you're like, okay, well, what's this about? I'm playing a video game, but why? Who am I? What's going on? What is all this? And this game appears to have identified that the answer is you don't need to understand 100% of the conceit behind this in order to enjoy playing a video game, because a video game is a tactile experience.
Yeah. The breadth of options available to the Warhammer fan for how they can engage with the property are pretty immense. Because Red, you mentioned, like, there's the game, there's the painting aspect, a very tactile kind of like art hobby. There's the books, and then video games, and probably other stuff that I'm forgetting. Role playing, I guess, is also in there.
There's at least one RPG for it.
It's like an omni hobby. It's a mega hobby. You can always find more if you are wanting it, which is very appealing, because how many times is there a property where it's like, oh man, I wish there was like more depth that I could get out of this. I wish there was more enjoyment. In Warhammer, it really does seem like there is always more you can do. You can paint more minis. You can express yourself by, like building different little armies, and it's fun and it's very engrossing. But to get to that level, like, that's the one thing you do. And that's okay, but that is a very steep investment. So the question is, how can we be able to enjoy a property like Warhammer without going to all those lengths? And what is it about the medium of perhaps video games specifically that might be best suited to that question? So I say all this, I don't give a shit about lore, as context for the following statement that Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 has one of the hardest onboarding assignments imaginable for a media property, yet turns in some of the best world-building work I personally have ever seen in video games. Side note, I said some. Nobody here is taking shots at Elden Ring. We recognize the king. We're not here to start a fight. I would just like to elevate another game to the pedestal of the big boys leagues. Not looking to dethrone anybody here.
It's always fun seeing you have an argument with a comment section I've never read. Be like, oh, you came prepared.
What landmines are Blue aware of that Red's like, what?
Yeah, I'm just here in my little fishing boat watching the shadows of great leviathans pass underneath me.
So I'm not here for the lore. I'm here for the world, for the immaculate vibes of being in a spaceship that is also a cathedral.
Yep, there we go.
This, when I got to the bridge of the ship after completing the tutorial level, and I looked out to this huge fleet of battle barges, I'm like, yes.
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 Good.
There were a few moments before then, but when I got to that point, I'm like, okay, no, I'm in this, like, for good. It started with the shields and it ended with this. I'm like, okay, now I'm locked in. But we'll go over this opening hour and see what we can learn about this onboarding process.
Cool.
We pivot to hour one
classy.
as we go scene by scene. Yes, we'll talk about this in a second. First things first, we get the bare essentials, a little text scroll filling in with some key information. 41st millennium, galaxy-spanning Imperium of Man, got all kinds of aliens, some heretics that come into play later. Everything's bad, constant war. There's no critical thinking going on here. Superstition, prayer, that's it. If you are living in this time period and unfortunate enough to be conscious, you are functionally in hell. But here we are, so let's go. And then after this text block, they hit us with in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
Classic.
As is tradition.
Of course.
So we get that, and then we have a little cutscene starting with a look at the planet Kadaku, and the Tyranid invasion kind of warps in, and all these little gloopy, Cthulhu-y looking spaceships start to fly down, and we cut to some, I guess, Cadian, not the Space Marines
Imperial
guys
Guard,
looking up. Yes,
Cadian
Imperial
troopers.
Guard looking up as these, like, streaking meteors of Tyranid ships fly across the sky, and the look on the guy's face is like, oh, piss. And then hard cut to a computer screen. Not even CRT, we're going before then. It's P1 phosphor, green and orange kind of monitors, super retro,
specific.
in a room with these candles everywhere, very kind of chapel-like interior space. Screen flickers to life, green little logo of the Imperium of Man, the double eagle, which it took me a while to realize one of the eagles is a live eagle, and the other one it's a robot head. That's cool. Only the left eagle has a little dot for the eye. It took me a while to notice that, but it's like, oh, that's cool.
That is
fun.
cool. Good job, Warhammer.
Yeah, good job, Warhammer. So we get a essentially mission brief in the form of a message sent over the astropathic relay detailing to the Space Marines who are about to go on this mission, what the fuck is up? What are we doing? And it's very fun to be receiving this information in the exact same way the characters would be getting it. We could get this as narration and it would be, fine, but seeing it in the same way that the characters would experience it puts us in their minds. And also the vibes that just drip off this computer screen are really, really impressive. So the key information is galaxy map, planet Kadaku, Tyranid invasion, got it, cool. Nothing spectacularly complicated, but we see the sense of like, something's weird here. If we're new to this world, why are there candles all over this computer? If they're so far in the future, why is their tech so like delightfully retro and quaint in comparison? And I have the title of this slide, Loading Please Pray, because we have a little bit of the sense of there's this like this mix of religion and technology and some cursed loveless marriage going on here that we'll see explored over the course of the game. But we populate in with more information here, and we learn about Project Aurora, Volume 1 available next year. No relation. Stay tuned for publication news. What? Always be plugging.
Oh, okay, geez, all right. Famously, our business model. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, listen, we never tell you guys to subscribe. We never tell you to like the video. It's only if you want to do that. We try not to put those thoughts in your head. So when we do have something to tell you about, like pins, which, by the way, holiday sale going on right now, actually, now that I think about it. And then Aurora showing up next year.
And if you don't want to wait, it's available right now online. Like 800 pages at this point. ComicAurora.com.
This is now additional media for Warhammer required reading. But, so we get a bunch of information after it's like, Tyranids. Oh no. We learn, cease any bombardment preparation, Project Aurora present. Which leads us to question, what on earth could be so important to the Imperium that they wouldn't immediately fire up every big gun in defense of this planet that is getting overrun by Tyranids in like 3 seconds? We don't understand it yet, but we have a really interesting window into how the Imperium thinks and what their priorities are. So then, a couple little slides down the screen later, computer shows an image related to Project Aurora and flashes access denied across it. So it tells us there's this thing that is so important, it's worth potentially having parts of the planet get destroyed because we're not bombarding the planet with everything we have, but also I will not show it to you. So we're seeing some strata built up here. There's immediate depth at work in this world where there's a prioritization of importance where it's not just the planets under invasion, there's this thing. And it's not just, oh, you the player don't know about it yet. The world itself is conspiring to keep this a secret where I will not tell you, but you have to fix this and save this thing for me. That creates intrigue in a really interesting way rather than making us care about whatever the hell Project Aurora is right from the jump when we're already getting bombarded with all this information. The purpose, like, fuck you, stop asking questions, just do it, is, like, it's perverse and it's kind of, like, backwards logic, but for me, I feel like it works. It's a fun little kind of inversion of how this kind of exposition usually goes.
I was going to say,
like, fuck you.
I'm having a lot of thoughts on expositional writing, but I'll get to them once we're past this slide.
Yeah, I'll finish the slide right here, yeah. And then my favorite moment when the computer goes into orange text mode to say, Aurora strategic value, and then 3 little arrows pop in where it hard cuts to say, absolute, which is, in my opinion, fantastic word choices. Like, not like severe, not critical importance. It is absolute. This cannot get destroyed or tampered with in any way. And then after that, the transmission sign-off is submitted to Astropathic Relay, hail the Omnissiah, hail the Machine God, which gives us a little bit of the flavor of that kind of techno-theology at play in this world. And if you're like me and don't really know what's going on here, the religious language in a formal computer sign-off related to the concept of machinery immediately makes some neurons fire about, that's why there are all these candles here in this very kind of cathedral-like ambience of this computer room. The ultimate gamer space.
Rate my setup. Yeah, I think that there's some really interestingly counterintuitive stuff that happens when a writer has a complicated system and world to explain to people. Because, of course, the reflex is, I'll explain it. Obviously, I'll sit them down, point for point, bullet points, grab the spark notes. Everyone needs to know exactly what's up. And the thing is, I completely understand that. I'm the reigning champion of over-explaining myself. I absolutely get the reflex. But it ignores the fact that storytelling is a form of imperfect communication. You craft a story in your head, you put it out into the world, it loses something in translation. An audience looks at the story, takes it into themselves. The version they receive in their mind is not what you had. It's not what you created, and it's not even what they saw. It's filtered through their perceptions of the world. Keeping yourself aware of that, you have to question how much of this information needs to make it into their head for the story to function. how much do they need to understand exactly what I'm saying in order for them to get the gist? Because if you're trying to communicate exact, like, mathematical precision levels of factuality, then you're going to struggle, because that's not how most people work. But when it comes to, like you said, no lore, only vibes, all this story needs to communicate at this juncture is, what is the threat, what else is going on in the broadest strokes, and what's the vibe. And with Warhammer does not really seem like it is insecure in itself in any way. You know, Warhammer doesn't think it has anything to prove. Warhammer doesn't think it needs to appeal to a wider audience. Warhammer doesn't dumb itself down to make itself more accessible.
And that is critical. It does not dumb itself down at all, even if it chooses selectively what information to surface to the player.
Exactly, because there is that very cynical sort of branding-oriented idea of like, okay, yeah, you've got this story, but does it have mass market appeal? We need to make sure that the kiddies at home can understand what you're saying. You know, dumb it down, make it easier to digest. You know, compare it to something they already know they like. You know, all these tools that are used to sort of like mash up the peas and mix it in with the baby food so you don't notice you're eating your vegetables, when in actuality you can just present it and be like, here it is. Take it or leave it. We'll be here either way. And with Warhammer, like, they don't need to explain this at all. They don't have to. But because they have this massive lore Bible behind it, absolutely everything that goes on screen, like, the people making this never need to wonder, like, what should I fill this space with? Because the lore Bible will just tell them. It's like, oh, okay, you're doing this. Here's what these computers look like. Here's the god that these programmers worship. Here's how it is communicated via astropathic relay, which is a network of psychic people that are used to transmit things across the galaxy, but sometimes they explode. We'll get to it. And, like, you don't need to know that right now. You don't need to know that this is going through a psychic person rather than just, like, getting emailed across the internet. You don't need to know that. It's not important. You don't need to know what Project Aurora is. You don't need to know who is saying, you cannot bombard this planet. I have the authority. The strategic value is absolute. You don't need to have this conversation played out by a couple characters going, as you know, Bob, you are a soldier. You are being given your orders. That's it.
Yeah. It's a really effective framing where it's like, all I need to do to the player is give them the order. Done. Easy.
Because again, like, anytime a video game is like, oh, please, won't you play me? Here, I'll make it so easy for you. It's like, if I sat down to play the game, you can assume I'm going to at least try to play the game. Like, you don't need to keep winning me over. It's like, I'm playing a third-person over-the-shoulder military shooter. Please point me at things to shoot this gun at. And the game is like, okay, they're called Tyranids. You'll know them when you see them. Have fun. And then you just kind of go.
This little section here with the computer might be my favorite part of this whole opening hour in terms of how it's structured, just because it's so devilishly simple. It's information kind of populating in on a computer screen, but every aspect of what's going on here for this, like, minute and a half little sequence is just dripping in character and detail and a sense of place, not just the information on the screen, but the sense that, like, we are looking at the screen, we are in this space, not just getting the information, but in the environment of the person who is presumably writing it. I don't think the Space Marines are sitting in this computer, like, looking over the guy's shoulder, like, okay, cool, Aurora, you gonna tell me what that is, Chief? Nope, fine.
My turn in the computer lab, brother.
So immediately after that, music kicks into full chant as we meet the Deathwatch Marines, sporting some peak edgelord iconography with, skull on their masks and all this stuff on this giant pauldron about, like, death and war and glory, brother. And this big eye with a skull on it, and it's very immediately kind of this sense of over the top deathly machismo going on here to cue us into, these are the big boys. So earlier we see the one kind of Imperial Guard guy on the planet Kadaku looking up like, oh, and then we soon cut to the Space Marines like, let's get to work, brothers. So they're flying in to do their mission. They're going to plant a virus bomb in the atmosphere and blow it up to stop the Tyranid invasion. But the ship, while they're flying in, gets ganked by an ungodly amount of Tyranids who just start prying open all of the doors, like side evacuation door, prying it open, rear door, prying it open, just like clawing their way inside. So the Marines just stand up, grab their bolt pistols, and just start fucking blasting everything. Eventually, they whip out the signature chainsword when they start getting closer, and they just go to work. They are complete pictures of calmness as they stand up in the inside of their ship getting overrun with Tyranids and just start destroying them. It's fantastic. Eventually, our main character guy with the red hood here gets knocked out of the ship by a Tyranid and is extremely chill as he literally falls out of the sky and crashes into the ground. There's no facial expressions, obviously, but his body language conveys tranquility. He's just like, all right, I fell out of the ship. I will turn around and face the grounds. They are just grooving.
I will highlight that he does kind of go splat, and it takes him a little while to pull himself back up. I really think that the main thing that the body language of this intro highlights is like, oh, these guys are not even a little bit scared. Like, some of them might die, they don't care. And that is important information. Like, we don't see their faces, we don't hear them talking, they don't bark orders or coordinate with each other, they just start going. And when our guy gets yote, he's not like, oh no, I have to rejoin the others. He's like, okay, it's time to start murdering everything that looks like a xenomorph. They've done a lot of, like, completely dialogue-free characterization in this early part.
Yeah.
And one fun thing about that initial sequence is it's not at all clear who you're going to be playing as. At all.
No.
This might still be opening cutscene like, oh no, we're going to show how scary the Tyranids are by having them, like, you know, rip these guys apart. And then, nope, oh, one of them got yote out of the ship. Oh, we're following that guy? Oh, okay. And then it's like, oh, I guess we're playing this guy now. I also got to highlight just the shot when he falls out of the ship. I really appreciated how basically the camera falls ahead of him and is looking back up. So before we see that he's hitting the ground, we see, uh-oh, there are trees now. We must be pretty close to the ground. I really liked that moment of like, boy, how high up are we? Oh, not high enough. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Brace for impact, boys.
It's super well done. The following sequence is when we get into the actual prologue mission, and then Red will start to get some narration over our communication, some actual dialogue going on as we pick ourselves up and start wandering towards this big facility to go launch this virus bomb. So we get to see what an Imperium battlefield looks like, a whole bunch of Tyranids running around beyond the invisible walls of our play area, running through these open fields, and we're like, yeah, that's a lot of them, more than I can handle, so let's get this virus bomb thing going. Our kill team leader is cut off of comms, so he cannot speak to anyone else, but the other people can speak to each other, so we hear two different team members, Ulfar and Kelstros, speaking on what they call Vox, Latin for voice.
Right.
And we get to hear a little bit of them talking back and forth, like, oh, I have the virus bomb, I'm going to such and such, how are you doing, brother, with the Tyranids? Like, oh yes, there's so many of them, every time I cut one down, 10 more take their place. I'll bite through them if I have to get to the facility and launch the bomb. So we get a little bit of kind of over comms dialogue happening, but it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. They don't have characters yapping in our ear the entire time like is the case in some games. It's pretty much like you get to a new area, a couple lines back and forth, get to a new area, a couple lines back and forth. But what happens over the course of the mission as you get towards where you're going is you stumble onto the now corpses of your fellow kill team members as they eventually get overwhelmed by Tyranids. One guy, you pick up a bolt pistol from him. There's another guy, eventually Ulfar, you find dead. He gets stabbed by one of the bigger Tyranid warriors. Kelstros gets like exploded or something. You kind of pick up the virus bomb from him. So you are the last survivor of the squad as you're working your way through. They don't all die at once, but they get picked off over the course of this thing as they're all separated in the crash. And we get to feel a little bit of the peril the Space Marines face. So they're not scared, but they can die. So we get to see kind of that contrast play out and understand, like, yeah, you know, they are expected to go out and die, but they are extremely chill, knowing that they are not immortal and they will, in fact, all die horrible deaths eventually.
I think it's actually one of the interesting elements of the Warhammer universe that I personally am not the hugest fan of because it flattens characterization so far, which is that there's nothing going on except war. None of these bitches have anything to live for aside from, you know, duty and honor and glory to the God Emperor of mankind, yada, yada, yada. So, like, of course they're not scared. They've got nothing else going on. This is literally the only option. And I think that that's cool characterization because it highlights, like, oh, okay, these guys, I assume, are not the anomaly. Presumably, all of them are kind of like this. Like, they're all extremely noble, badass warriors that have literally no concept of any priorities beyond mission or dying gloriously in the mission. It's not even dying gloriously, like, they don't want to have it happen. It's just like, well, I'll do my best, and if it doesn't work, I know my brothers will pick up the slack and carry on, you know, that kind of shit. And It's texture-based, because I think one of the interesting things about the Warhammer universe is how utterly alien it is. The entire point of it is like, this is a world you could not conceive living in because it has nothing going on except like hellish misery. Like that little Star Wars opening crawl thing you showed highlighted that. It's like, yeah, it's awful. Nothing is going on. The world is incredibly cruel. Everyone is like paranoid and caught up in superstitions rather than intellect and enlightenment, and everyone is miserable and nobody knows what's going on, and if you're not part of the machine of war, you're getting ground between the gears, and that's all well and good, but like us, you know, playing this on a nice comfy couch in a nice place to live, are like, boy, that's rough, buddy. Couldn't be me. The game doesn't try and make you feel like, that's right, I am Titan. I know what he's been through. At every turn, they kind of just drive home how, like, absolutely unrelatable this dude is on most levels. And this is, again, it's a really interesting writing thing, because there's this fallacy that, like, your character has to be relatable. They have to function like a self-insert. And it's like, that's categorically untrue, and this proves it. You don't need to be like, I see myself in you. You can just be like, I see you, and you're interesting. I want to see where this goes. Like, that's all you need a lot of the time.
Yeah. A little more lore flavor gets added when we get to the facility. Put the bomb in the chamber and start hacking away on the computer to get it to work. And the machine spirit says, hazardous material detected. Further benedictions required. Which, again, for me, is like, I don't know how any of this shit works. So it's like, what do you mean I need to pray because there's, like, icky stuff in this bomb tube designed for bombs?
Yeah, hazardous material, like the viral bomb.
Yeah.
You know?
The opens viral bomb. There better not be any virus in this. The machine spirit is also a little bit sassy because this facility is a little overrun, and it says, console inactive for 22 hours. This impiety to the Omnissiah has been logged, which is just funny. That's just funny that they have these programs and how they talk about things, completely oblivious to the fact that the facility is being swarmed with Tyranids from every angle and has been for at least a day. I find that hilarious.
It kind of just drives home that, like, even the parts of this world that are on your side aren't really on your side. Like, they're not going to be nice to you. They're not going to go out of their way to make things easy or, you know, accessible.
Yeah, there is we'll touch on this again a little bit later, but a hilarious through line of the crippling bureaucracy of the Imperium of Man being perfectly entwined with game design bullshit, where it's like, I need this key for this lock to get this weapon to fight this guy, which is normally, like, stupid and obtrusive and just kind of annoying to deal with as a player, but in this game world, all of that can be built into, this is just the level of entrenched bureaucracy the Imperium is operating on all the time. We'll touch on a pretty funny example of that a little bit later. And again, one last little detail is when you slam the button to start charging the cannon to shoot the virus bomb in the atmosphere, it says, rite of capacitors initiated. Personnel may begin prayers of charging, which is literally like loading, please pray. And that combination, it's not terribly complicated, but it's interesting. It's a fun flavor and character to the way the world works. And in their case, these phosphor monitors are spirits. They have little gods inside of them.
Yeah. At every turn, this game does not do the game design thing, it does the Warhammer thing. You know, they could have just been like, loading, please wait. But instead they're like, personnel may begin prayers of charging. Again, the thing I mentioned is, like, they never had to ask themselves, how should we design this? What should we put in this area? What should we make as the background for this? The Warhammer Lore Bible will already tell them at length what they need to do there. Yeah,
and the benefit of building a game with a world this complex or convoluted, depending on how you slice it, is that whenever you have a question of what you can do, the lore has an answer for you, and you can use the lore not to just exposit for hours and hours and hours, read these 20 books to actually understand what's going on with the God Emperor, but, like, whenever we have a thing, we can make that as evocative and illustrative of the world as possible for what the polygons on screen allow us to do. And that, I think, is really cool, and a strength of this game and video games specifically as a medium for this. So we shoot the bomb into the stratosphere. We get, unfortunately, killed by a Carnifex. Apparently, though, Titus once defeated a Carnifex with nothing but a bolt pistol, unfortunate for him that he didn't get out of it this time. You wake up with this guy in a skull mask who saw you from across the battle barge and really liked your vibe, who opens with formulaic "Praise the Emperor" as his greeting when you wake up, explaining to you that your wound was fatal, but you were remade with the Rubicon surgery into a Primaris Marine, which are all terms that a Warhammer fan, even casually, will completely understand the difference between Firstborn Marines and Primaris Marines.
Well.
Me, knowing goddamn nothing, I'm like, okay, I died, but I'm back.
Yep.
That's not complicated. That much I can get. There's a lot of vocab here, but the points beneath all of the fancy vocabulary is we're getting branch transferred.
Yeah.
We died, but we didn't, and now we're getting branch transferred. Cool. If you know the backstory for the first game, which is I have learned after the fact that Titus was accused of heresy and sent to the Death Watch to do his penance, he now is back and is like, okay, you can't talk about it, so don't go yapping. If your battle brothers ask you a question, be sure to stonewall them at any point for the next week. If you have the context, you understand a little more what's going on. But even if you don't, it's like, okay, cool, I get it.
Yep.
Like, I don't know what was going on before, but clearly Titus was doing some variety of penance, and now he's back to work.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Not that complicated.
This is fully unrelated. It's so funny to me that the word yapping has clearly recently embedded itself in your vocabulary because you've used it like 4 times already in one slideshow.
Oh, wow.
I was like, this is the word of the day.
Yeah, I was watching the Mini Minuteman Philip Zeba videos recently, and he describes Philip as yapping.
I mean, yeah.
So, last little section here is we get our new armor, our new mission, and we are off to the races. We get a very cool cutscene. Titus suiting up, cross-cut with him, writing out liturgies and having this little conversation with a chaplain like, what is your duty? My mission is, or whatever the hell the little lines are. Very, very Warhammery platitudes, but he's writing this thing that gets like stamp wax sealed onto his armor, which is it's so cool because the paper is so like fragile and soft, and this armor is like 1,000,000 pounds, and that combination kind of tickles me that it's like, here's your armor and the little ribbon with your cute little prayer that you wrote out, a little macaroni art on the side of your giant Ultramarine armor.
This one's going right on the Marine.
Yes, exactly.
Incredible.
Little servitors just like writing out stuff and just like slap it on their nearest Space Marine, but they can only reach as high as his like upper thigh.
Yeah, it just gets magnetized on there.
Ending with the chaplain asking, what is your pledge? And Titus says, my pledge is eternal service.
Yep.
And then bam, title card. We're in. That is the first hour of the game concluded, and we as the player are so fucking ready. At least I was. That was my experience. Clearly a lot of other people were because the game sold gangbusters.
Yeah.
There is a tiny bit of follow-up dialogue with Akarin as we get our actual kind of next mission where we have to go to get this guy out of this facility, and then we get a little more Project Aurora stuff. We meet our new team members. The relevant detail here in this scene is that we are on the bridge of the ship that happens to be a full-ass cathedral with whole Gothic windows.
Of course.
Which is so goddamn cool, just like for me personally. But that is the first hour of the game, and then we're in. We're off, and we have everything we need to be able to go and enjoy the rest of the game.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, what did we learn over the course of this little hour of cutscenes and gameplay? First, the barest essentials of the plot, factions, and characters that we need to know the core who and what. We get the feel and texture of the world from the Imperium's perspective, learning how their systems work, how they communicate with each other, what the Death Watch Marines are like, what kind of missions they're sent on, how they go about doing things like launching bombs into the stratosphere. And then also we get to see the strategies this game will use for the rest of its runtime with the rest of the lore, story, and characters that they're showing us beyond just what we see in this first hour. So the game drops a lot of little hooks in this first hour, trusting that a newcomer player can follow along with at least one of them. It might be the characters, it might be the style, it might be the world, the way that people talk, the computer stuff, which it was in my case when I was playing through this opening section. And characters will gesture at other aspects of the world, but it's never so painstakingly spelled out where we have to stop the plot, have a character look to camera and be like, okay, player, as you know, and then, spell out the next random bullshit. One thing that I kind of snagged onto that I thought was interesting was how a lot of characters in the Imperium will say, like, the Emperor protects or the Emperor provides whenever they find anything they need. Like, he is the guiding principle that will always deliver them exactly where they need to be with what they need for the situation. And then when they die, it was the Emperor's will all along.
Yeah, of course.
And it's only when Chaos characters show up that we get the sassy interjection that the Emperor is just a dead guy, or at least so Chaos thinks.
Yes.
We as the players only hear any of that when other characters jump in with that, because we are experiencing the world as Titus sees it. And that placing in his perspective does a lot to help us not necessarily sympathize with Titus's experience, but to try to understand a little bit of what he's thinking of and go with the flow of how he is interacting with the world. So the characterization is not particularly deep, but it is well done. And
Yeah.
there's a key difference there.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting just seeing this from the perspective of someone who, like, I did passively absorb a lot of the underlying lore. Like, I think probably everyone involved in the development of this game probably couldn't really separate themselves out fully enough from just knowing Warhammer to be like, what is Joe, never even painted a mini before, going to experience when they open this game? Like, is this going to be accessible for them? You know, it's that XKCD comic of, like, you know, we can only assume that your average layman knows the chemical formula for several basic silicates and quartz, of course.
And
yeah,
quartz.
and it's like, oh, yeah, we can only assume that your average Warhammer player will understand the Ultramarine core, the God Emperor of Mankind, the Omnissiah, the Horus Heresy, the Machine God, the Catan, and a fucking Siaphus Cain, of course. Anyway, you were probably one of the ideal test subjects for this game of just, like, no investment in this world, no interest in getting into the traditional form of the game, zero context, drop you into the game, how's it gonna play? And the answer is, well, you see, you have gold trim and Gothic architecture, so I'm 100% in. Yeah.
Yeah, I am so on board. It started with the shield, followed up with the cathedral computer, and culminated with the cathedral spaceship.
Well, it's just, especially in the space of sci-fi, I think a lot of long-running sci-fi franchises have sort of rebranded themselves to try and keep up with the current vision of the future. It's like, you watch original Trek and everything is like switches and buttons, and you watch J.J. Abrams Trek and everything is touch screens, and it's like, well, now everything feels weird and polished. Like, I think if you tried to redo the aesthetics of Warhammer, you'd probably actually die. Because it is so heavily grounded in the aesthetics of the whole setup. You know, just the absolutely ridiculous blend of techno-futurism, cybernetic dystopia stuff, and the, like, 1100s, you know, church schism vibes.
Yeah. And that's really it, is it's not just like, oh, it's a very medieval aesthetic, but in space. There's a lot of contrast going on that is inseparable to this world working the way it does. Like, you couldn't update Warhammer from crunchy buttons to touch screens and not lose, like, half the charm along the way. Because it isn't just that we have space crusaders, it's not just techno-gothic. They're a fascistic, mechanized theocracy of turbo-Catholic super soldiers who put candles on computers, pray to make their loading screens go faster, and build spaceships with cathedral windows. All of this contrast and these disparate kind of aesthetics brought together in this blend is what makes them so compelling. And if we kind of look laterally, the Necrons aren't just like zombies. They're robot dead people, and that contrast is what makes them more interesting than just dead guy faction. And I'm sure I could have similar observations for the rest of the factions if I knew anything about them.
I mean,
That's fine.
Me too?
No. See, Exhibit 1, I do not care about the lore, do not explain it to me.
I will, if you'll permit
No,
me
go
a
ahead,
single
go ahead, I'll
tangent.
give you one.
Just
I'll
with the
give you one.
Necrons. I think the genuinely interesting thing about the Necrons is that they are what the Imperium of Man is on the road to turning themselves into. Because them turning themselves into mechanized beings was a plot by the Catan that became the Void Dragon that became the Machine God. So, like, I think in Rogue Trader, one of the characters even says, like, oh, the Necrons, yes, an early project of the Machine God. And it's like, oh, we're just fucking saying that? Okay. I thought that was in the we'll never say it is or isn't true Games Workshop lore limbo zone. But no. So you look at the Imperium of Man, and you have the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Tech Priests and, you know, all the Space Marines are like somewhat cyberneticized. You know, you can see like they're all 8 feet tall. They've got little bolts in their head. You know, a lot of them are missing eyes or arms, that kind of thing. And the Adeptus Mechanicus is all about like, you know, replace flesh with metal, all that good shit. And then you look at the Necrons, and they're like, wonder who that's for. Like, it is genuinely interesting, specifically if you want to like draw connections of like the Necrons are what the Imperium of Man will become at this current trajectory, but they will never ever acknowledge it because they've got this weird like humano supremacy, like we're the chosen of the Emperor, we are automatically the galaxy's specialist boys. We couldn't possibly be pawns in the scheme of a much greater entity. That would be heresy, and that automatically means you have to shut up. Like, it's truly just a testament to the absolutely devastating power of not being able to like think things through fully because you cut yourself off because you're like, this is heretical. Anyway, there's truly infinite depths of lore to plumb, and also they keep rebooting it every few years and changing it, which is fun.
There's always something new to learn.
I'm not mad. It's just interesting. And I think that the contrasting aesthetics is a thing that's very prominent with the Space Marines especially, because again, they are the Games Workshop golden boys. They are the high rollers. They're the ones that get the most like love and the most lore and nuance. And, you know, there's nuance in the other spaces, but far less of it. And a lot less work put into the theming, in my experience. It's also because every other faction, you know, Warhammer started off very satirical, and the Space Marine faction is mostly the one that was like, I see, it is funny because we are extremely strong and the coolest and the best. And it's like, well, it was funny because you thought that, but it's not as funny now that we're playing it straight. And they have to reconcile that with the Orcs are soccer hooligans, and the Tau are space communists that initially, I just learned this, Magenta let me know. Apparently the thing with the Tau, the whole like, oh, they use mind control, was like a retcon, because initially the premise is just that they were like space communists. And so when like the Imperium ran into them, they were like, I don't understand, they're all working together. Clearly they must be utilizing some sort of horrifically immoral mind control technology. And then in the later updates they were like, yeah, that's why, because God forbid a faction actually works like a fucking society could. Anyway, there's just so much going on. You know, Warhammer, as mentioned, goes up its own ass twice, but like so much of it is just built on an ironclad sense of aesthetics that they are just unwilling to, you know, give an inch on. It
starts with the aesthetics, and basically every choice after that kind of ripples out from there. That leads to situations where Space Crusaders, what the Imperium basically is, not very complicated, but because we're able to kind of expand on these contrasts and see them from different lenses, whether we are in on the joke and taking the piss out of the Imperium of Man, or if we're thinking like, oh no, wait, they're kind of cool though, like look at the shields. Like there's enough like kind of a spectrum of how we can understand them that even though they are not very complicated at all, they can still be interesting. And that's the key difference that this game is able to exploit. Space Marines, pretty boring on paper. There's not that much going on, but there's a lot that we can play with to be able to have fun in the context of a video game, and that's what I was able to get out of this experience.
Yeah.
So a couple stray thoughts as we go through things that don't really deserve their own entire slides, but I want to just kind of like signpost here. We get a sense of the scale of the galaxy and the scale of the war through how much stuff the Imperium is willing to just blow the fuck up to stop their enemies. Because all 3 planets that we visit in this game, to some extent, get blown up by the Imperium to stop the bad guys. Kadaku, the first planet, ends in one of the co-op missions just getting fully destroyed. Like, it gets nuked. Yeah, done. Demirium basically gets blown up, and they crash an old ancient spaceship into it in one of the co-op missions. The Sword of Atreus, there's a whole mission called Fall of Atreus, where you basically have to convince these Adeptus Mechanicus goobers, like, hey, I need you to let me fire up this decommissioned ship and crash it into this silver tower of Tzeentch over there that we can't get any of our weapons through. And the Adeptus Mechanicus are like, do you understand how, like, historically important this ship is for what it's done for the Imperium? And then Acheron Overcomes is like, please? And the Adeptus Mechanicus is like, fine. Fuck. fine. Damn it. Really, really
God,
funny.
that's funny. Actually, I just connected that because throughout this entire game, anytime a character is like, no, we can't destroy this, it's too useful, they are incorrect, and
they are proven immediately wrong.
And they're framed as an antagonist for doing it. Not like a full-on bad guy like the Tyranids or the Forces of Chaos, but like the Adeptus Mechanicus is like, we can't just nuke the planet. We have to preserve Project Aurora. Don't do anything bad to it. And our main boys are always like, ugh, why are these obstructionist nerds telling us not to break their shit? Ugh, they're always going on about this. And like, from an external perspective, it's like, yeah, okay, Project Aurora, spoiler alert, didn't work. So like, yeah, obviously it was all kind of fruitless and they were being manipulated by the Forces of Chaos, yada, yada, yada. But it's not like the Space Marines knew that shit,
No.
The idea that like the greatest and most noble form of combat is mutually assured destruction. And if you have anything you are unwilling to break, you are going to be like manipulated into being defeated, is a very interesting undercurrent throughout the game, because it genuinely does tie in with some theming about like willingness to sacrifice, which is kind of central to Titus's arc, which I think is kind of cool. But it also, again, like there's almost no narrative weight to it because none of these guys have anything to lose anyway. It's kind of a fundamental issue with the Warhammer world building framework, is that everyone is a stoic badass warrior with zero priorities outside of combat, which means it's not noteworthy when a character is like, I will make this noble and heroic sacrifice, because it's like, yes, so will everybody else here.
Yeah, nothing in the world, in the universe, is above being sacrificed for the war, which is not good, but it's illustrative, and insofar as it does that, it is interesting for us.
Yep.
Third example is on the Hive City of Avarax. One of the co-op missions involves basically loading a nuke onto a train and shooting it into a hive city because there's Tyranids in it, and you blow it up.
Wow.
So like they're bombing everything in this game. Again, we talked about Necrons a little earlier, but we get a peek at Necrons beneath an Imperial tomb world.
Well, tomb world is technical term for a Necron world. It's an Imperium Necropolis world. So it's a
Okay.
graveyard,
Got
but they
it.
accidentally built it on top of a Necron tomb world.
Yeah, double graveyard, yeah.
Yep.
It shows us some of the strata of the universe without throwing everything in front of the camera, as much as that pains Red personally.
It's fine. I'll live.
But it's a good way to show like there's a lot more going on, even if we don't see it. And that's a much larger conversation that I feel like is played out in some trope talks. Like, you can't put everything in front of the screen, and the world will feel bigger and more complicated if we are made aware that stuff is happening off screen, which is what the Necron presence in this story is able to do, beyond just being a presumable sequel hook.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they're getting out of this, which I find good and compelling writing. And then finally, the game builds lore into the play experience by justifying game design lock and key bullshit, stupid space bureaucracy. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the mission Reliquary in the co-op campaign has an entire sequence where you are basically trying to open a door to get to an area in this like planet cemetery on Demirium, but you have to go through this insane protocol where you have to get a power source to turn on the console, and the console's like, hello, what do you want to do? And you're like, open the door, and the console's like, you can only do that and breach the consecration barrier if you are going beyond there to inter someone in a different place out of the necropolis and somewhere else. So you have to get a little servo skull and go down into the tombs and find a burial crypt that qualifies for reinterment. And then you go back and the servo skull's like, good news, big machine spirit, I found a guy who qualifies for reinterment. Open the doors. And the Imperium, despite the fact that this is their technology, cannot just open the fucking door. They have to go through all this bureaucratic bullshit. Hilarious.
Yeah. I think it's genuinely kind of interesting how every layer of world building that gets shown in the game demonstrates that they've all been in this game for way, way, way too long, and everything is stratified to hell and back. Like, you can't reform anything. You can't bypass anything. Every problem is like 5,000 years old, and there's 5 load-bearing things stacked on top of it so they can't fix them.
Yeah.
It really highlights, like, everybody in this world is basically trapped. They're all stuck in this eternal war that is actual hell, basically. And we're playing it from the outside being like, woof, glad I'm not those guys. Anyway, for the Emperor!
And when you do actually find the guy, it's like, yes, this person is overdue for reinterment by 11 centuries. It's like, fuck.
Yeah, exactly. That's the issue. Like, everyone is so busy that, things just pile up.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of this this presentation, okay, I've got a new hyperfixation game. My wife is very patient with me when I want to play it in the evenings. But, like, so what? What's the point? What are we learning from this? Well, I think this game legitimately is a stellar example of tackling the challenges of world building in this very specific context of going through something incredibly dense and convoluted and oppressive to a new player experience. And as someone who usually does not care for literature, movies, or TV in hard sci-fi and fantasy, because the world building and lore is just so tedious, here are my personal lessons from my experience with Space Marine 2. First off, we don't need to inundate the player, reader, or viewer with backstory and lore. We can just get to the point. People are smarter than we give them credit for, and if the vibes are solid, they will have an anchor point. And if we can give a lot of vibes and a lot of little strings and hooks, the player will have a lot more to latch onto and have something they can follow through until they understand things more fully. We don't need to give them everything to make them understand how the world got to this point. We can just drop them in and go. That's okay. That works.
I've said when I'm getting into a new show that I'm not sure I'll like, I will start in like the middle of a season and just watch a random episode. It might be a slightly unfair thing to judge because a lot of the time I'm like, okay, I don't have all the context for this, but I'm not going into it being like, if this singular episode doesn't make me understand absolutely everything that's going on, I'm quitting right now. I always just want to get a feel for like, what's the character dynamics like? What's the general vibe of this show when the show is not specifically trying to onboard me? It usually works. It's usually pretty fun and rewarding. A lot of the shows I like the most, I got snagged by just a random episode, and then when I watched through it, I was like, oh, this does make more sense with context, but, you know, I almost liked it better when I had to extrapolate what the hell everyone was talking about. And this is just kind of like doing that bit on purpose. It's like, it's not even in medias res. It's like, you don't need the explanation. We're going to start at the beginning, and you'll pick up what you need as you go. Exactly. Trusting that the audience is going to stay engaged and invested enough to make that work. I think trust is actually kind of central to it. I don't want to go off on this for too long, but
please. This is the conclusion. This is the space that this is built for.
I suppose so. Because when you're writing a story, you know, you want your audience to understand it. But there's an element of mistrust in that impulse of like, if I don't frame this in exactly the right way, the audience is going to drop it and they're going to leave me. And it's like, okay, calm down. Like, a lot of people get into the story because they want to understand. Like, you cannot write for like a bad faith critic that it has no interest in understanding the world, or in this case, playing the game. Like, they couldn't have designed this game for Joe Schmo who was never going to like a Warhammer game. They have to design this game for a person who's going to like the way the game feels and be interested in the greater universe. Like, they really did a good job of not trying to cater for an audience that was never going to enjoy the game. And they also did a good job of not pretending that they were something they weren't. They're not going to like sand the edges off of Warhammer and pretend it's not this absolutely massive, overcomplicated mess. They're just going to kind of let it shine through and turn that into a feature and not a bug.
The concept of like, your players are smart, your audience is smart. They want to like this. Give them the chance.
Yeah, they chose to be here.
Yeah, you don't need to justify it with backstory. You can just get to the point, show them the good stuff. It's not just like, in media res doesn't mean start in the middle where everything's confusing. It means like, start the story as late as possible and just let them have fun. Right out the gate. We don't need to build up to it where you can only enjoy shooting Tyranids if you understand exactly where and when the Emperor turned into a ghost man. Like no, come on. We can just get to it. It's better for newcomers because we're not slowing everything down to make sure that they're up to speed and understand it perfectly. And then it provides depth for the veteran fans to appreciate, so we're not boring them by repeating a whole bunch of junk they already know. Like, the most exposition-y part of this entire first hour of the game is when the chaplain's like, we remade you with the Rubicon surgery as a Primaris Marine. You were in the Death Watch, but now you're not. That's the most overtly, like, exposition-y thing, and it's 15 seconds. That's fine. We can tolerate that. Like, that's the most it gets, and it's 15 seconds long. Like,
and also, that's not even explanation. It's like, we use the buzzword surgery. You were in this thing you don't know about. Now you're in this other thing you don't know about. It's like, that's not exposition. That didn't explain shit. That was just words.
Even the most exposition-y part of this whole first hour is still not even really exposition in the traditional sense.
Yeah, it's not hand-holding you even a little bit. It's like, well, I see you might be confused because last time you saw you were dead. Well, hear me out. We did the surgery that makes you not dead it anymore. And it's like, understood, brother. No further questions.
Yeah, it's like if you gave someone a Benadryl and decided to inform them of exactly who invented it, when, why, what they were eating when they came up with the formula. Like, no.
Yeah.
Just give them the fucking Benadryl. It's fine.
That's always a fun writing exercise when you write contemporary literature, the way people write, like, futuristic sci-fi. It's like, I stepped onto the train, a high-speed vehicle passed along 2 rails, carrying passengers and frequently cargo. Anyway.
Yes. Seriously. And now, at the end of all this, if I want more Warhammer, there are books and supplemental materials more than there are atoms in the universe. If I want it, I can get it, but the order of operations is important. I can find those things because I am invested. I don't have to read them first to become invested. And that's the key, like, switcheroo that I feel like a lot of people get tripped up on, is you have to understand before you can care. No. Just let me care, and then we'll see about how much I actually understand. I think switching that is the big, like, mental brain blast that I have come out of this experience with, that I will take going forward.
I mean, you know, most of the ADHD peeps in the audience can highlight that understanding something you don't care about is like actual brain torture, but caring about something will automatically fast track you into wanting to understand it.
Yeah.
The motivation is really strong, the hyperfixation, you know, all that stuff. Like, you care about the thing, it makes you want to look deeper and understand. If you can't get into the good stuff before you do your fucking homework and, like, study up, that's gonna drain all the motivation out of you. Like, that's an untenable ask, and nobody in their right mind would ask it of anybody except for every child in the U.S. schooling system. But, you know, we've all learned better, right? Anyway, it's quite interesting. I think that this game is very much like, it feels like it does this exactly right with very little wrong with it.
Yeah.
There's no extraneous, goofy stuff. It's just like, here is a gameplay loop, and also story is happening. We talked about when you were playing it, like, oh, it's fun how they don't, like, make you mash a button, they don't make you do dialogue choices that don't matter. They just, it's like, absolutely none of that. The plot of this game is going to happen with or without your participation, basically.
Yeah.
I do think it's very interesting how the game is structured so that, like, you don't know what's up with Titus. Like, if you played Space Marine 1, you've got an inkling, but also there's been like 100 years between then and now. He's basically a different guy at this point. So the game is not trying to get you, like, into this dude's head. You're basically watching him from the perspective of, like, your teammates Chiron and Gadriel, who are much easier to get a general vibe for, because they're not being purposefully, obfuscating about the whole thing.
And when we were doing our video and, like, making fun of how much of, like, a stubborn, like, non-volunteering ass Titus is, that's exactly the perspective that Gadriel and Charon have. So as a experienced player coming off of Space Marine 1, you understand Titus and you're in his shoes. But if you are a new player, you're basically coming at this from the perspective of Gadriel and Charon, and both of those perspectives work. It's a very elegant little way to handle that, whether or not it was strictly intentional. The experience we got being a little confused about what the fuck Titus's deal is a valid perspective that is mirrored by characters in the story.
Yeah, and the game gave us enough information over the course of it. Like, you know, we were obviously mostly taking the piss the whole time that you were playing, but, like, when I was going back through to edit it, I was like, oh, there's, like, a whole narrative in here. It's cool how you actually get to see Titus open up to his bros and stuff like that. Funny we missed it because we were talking about other stuff, but that's fine. This game does not at all tell you what happened in Space Marine 1, except through Titus very occasionally saying little bits of it. And, like, we had to learn about that stuff from the comment section, being like, actually, in the original game, Titus was, like, kind of cool and chill and, like, a chill and normal guy, and then he got branded a heretic and, like, tortured for 100 years, and it's like, okay, well, that sucks, but the game didn't tell me any of that, except, like, very briefly, so I don't really know how I was supposed to know that. And the thing is, I don't know how I was supposed to know that is not a sentiment this game inspires frequently, because the game never acts like you should know what they're talking about, you know? They're never like, only an idiot wouldn't know what the Adeptus Mechanicus is. It'll just, like, the information you need to know, you get, and everything else they'll just throw out there, and you might be like, I wonder what that is, and you can look it up, and we ran into that with some of the dialogue. Like, there's that part near the end of the game where it's like, oh, these Cadian troopers are out there, and one of the characters just says, like, you honor your homeworld's memory. And if you don't know shit about it, that sentence already communicates basically everything you would need to know to get the vibes off of that. It's like, okay, you are doing something cool and brave, you honor your homeworld's memory. Oh, so their homeworld, I assume, died in fire, and they're here, so they weren't there when it happened, obviously, but they're probably still butthurt about it. And, like, you extrapolate all this stuff out, and if you go and look up the wiki page, it's like, yeah, that plus, like, 500,000 more words of explanation, pretty much.
Yeah.
But all you need is in that one little sentence. It's very efficient dialogue writing because it doesn't feel the need to over-explain. It doesn't care if you get it. It's still gonna be there.
Exactly. So all of this to synthesize into one idea is transcend show don't tell. World build through vibes. The Emperor commands it, brother.
Oh no. Oh, we've given you a terrible dialogue weapon to use from now on.
Yes, I am insufferable.
It's so funny that you're going full gung-ho on this while also being like, I don't care about the lore and do not tell me what it is. like I'm having a great time with this, but I know certain sectors of the Warhammer fan base that are going to take this as like a personal like gauntlet throw.
I am cosplaying in mind, body, and soul as the Imperium because I'm making no effort to understand the world beyond myself.
Ah, I see. Yeah, they could be accusing you of being a fake gamer, but actually you are the most penitent of all.
Literally, if we zoom back here a second, if we look at what Titus wrote on his little macaroni art wax seal on his armor, reason begets doubt, doubt begets heresy, blessed is the mind too small for doubt.
Ha! That's the thing, this game...
That's me, baby!
It started off as satire.
That's why I think the game is very much in on the joke in this world. It does get to have it a little bit both ways, but it's fun. Also, while we're here, I'm going to insert footage of my most recent Imperium drip on my Assault class character.
Oh, boy.
As of when I edit this, I'm gonna just like put that in here. Wow, look at me. Look at how fashionable I am. Isn't that so cool? It'll be really embarrassing if I forget to edit this in.
How many DLC paint pots did you have to buy for this thing that I can definitely see and I'm not extrapolating from?
None with real money. I just leveled up a lot and I had a
None
bunch
with
of credits
real
left
money?
over.
How much in in-game money?
At least it's not drugs.
Yeah, I suppose.
At least it's not minis, yeah.
At least it's not minis. God damn, this game.
I had a blast.
Yeah, I know you did. I can tell.
I've gone mad with power.
It's always interesting seeing something just get its hooks into you, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a real fun game.
Started with the shields.
Yep, started with the shields.
Everything spilled out from there.
They knew exactly how to get you. The Emperor decrees that your brain stay too smooth, otherwise the wrinkles will attract and accumulate heresy and blaspheming thoughts. You guys are the good guys. Bye.
Awesome.